All right, everyone. If you can hear my voice, I invite you to conclude using your own. All right, I'm going to speak up just a little bit more. I'm really, really excited to be introducing our afternoon here today. You know, when I think about converging people into a space, whether it's a circle to discuss making a decision or to share knowledge and information, I think about what do I want to receive into my body? What do I want to hear? What do I want to taste? How does this influence what I speak and carry out into the world? And all of you who are here answered that question for me of who do I want to hear and who do I want to be hearing what we're sharing to carry out in the world. So I have a lot of gratitude for all of you. And I also have a lot of gratitude for the person I get to introduce right now. I first got to meet Alnoor in 2016, facilitating a panel at Symbiosis. And back at that time, when I heard what he had to share, I thought, okay, there's other people thinking about and working about on these challenges of how we really truly honor everything that we've received, the seen and the unseen, and how we embody those gifts and the gratitude of those things. Those of you who have been to my house know that I have sticky notes and whiteboards with words, codes, spells that I'm casting and those I'm hearing. And I encourage you all, I'll drop some links into our group, some podcasts that Alnoor has done in the past that are really powerful codes. Really happy to have him here to share some of those with you all today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind intro. Can everyone hear me well? In the back as well? Okay. A little bit louder? Okay, I'll go closer to the mic. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for the last few days. We were holding another gathering at Tierra Valiente about 2 hours from here, past La Fortuna. And we're going to have to leave shortly after the talk today. I think there's a panel right after as well, right? So we'll have another chance to deep dive. I'm not going to get so much into my background. I often find that the ego identification and the status and the all the bullshit we do on personal storytelling is usually distracting to the content. But I'm happy to answer questions after. I may or may not answer your question, but we'll see. We'll negotiate. How long do we have? Like an hour or so? Okay. So the theme of the conversation today is embodying post-capitalism. I'll talk for, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we'll move into some questions, and then we'll probably take a little break and then move into the panel. When we invoke this concept, this frame of post-capitalism, I'm not referring to some ism that comes after capitalism. Similar to the way academics talk about postmodernity. What they're referring to is to be informed by modernity. So there's no dash between post and capitalism. It's not a temporal frame. It's not simply time. There's post-capitalist realities that exist today that have been around for thousands of years, indigenous cultures and others that are in resistance to the dominant culture. There's the Zapatistas in Mexico. Many of you know about the Zapatista resistance movement in Chiapas. There's Rojava in the Middle East, feminist-led ecological state, 4.5 million person community between Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. 3 neighbors nobody wants to have. And lots of experiments are happening around the world. And partly what these experiments have in common is they have shared values. And they take their values in direct opposition to the dominant culture. And so we look at the dominant culture and we say, okay, well, what is this culture based on? It's based on extraction, separation from the living world, 500 years of colonialism, imperialism, rape, pillage, et cetera, and then we just try to create cultures that do the opposite, that are based on altruism, generosity, solidarity with all life, interbeing, etc. And that's what I mean by post-capitalism. And so when we talk about embodying post-capitalism, I'm first going to start by just sharing a little bit about the dominant culture. And many of you may feel like you know a lot of this content, and you probably do. And the request is to just stay with the trouble, whether it's uncomfortable, whether it feels like you know it, whether it's too much information and you feel saturated, to just sit with it in a kind of willing suspension of disbelief, if you will. And then I'm going to move to spiral logic, which is one attempt at a framework for other ways of knowing, being, sensing, and relating with the world. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about ontological shifts. And those will be like the three main slides. So it's not a lot of content, it's just dense content. How many people are familiar with this concept of ontology? Okay, great. So ontology sits somewhere between epistemology and metaphysics. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge, why we think we know what we know. And metaphysics is why we think we're here and where we're going. Philosophers just try to make this shit complex. So people think that you need some expertise or a PhD to discuss these things, but they're super basic. They're core to who we are. So ontology comes from the Greek word onto, which is being, sometimes also referred to as vision. So it's basically how we see and relate to the world. And what I'm going to argue is that our ontologies determine our structures. And then our structures determine our ontologies. And this is a reinforcing cycle. So the manner by which we approach the world is more important than what we think we're approaching and the way in which we're approaching it. Because we have no idea what we're approaching, because we've been socialized into a very particular ontology, which is the Occidental Western way of living. Globalized monoculture, McDonald's culture, the live, work, consume, die paradigm. And so we can start with the first slide. So it says philanthropy. Lynn Murphy and I just wrote a book called Post Capitalist Philanthropy, Healing Wealth in the Time of Crisis. But this applies to every sector. And so the logic of late-stage capitalism, or we can call it capitalist modernity, which is a frame I really like. The father of Rojava, Abdullah Öcalan, who's sitting in solitary confinement right now in a Turkish prison on an island by himself like Sisyphus, wrote this beautiful 5-book manifesto called Manifesto for Democratic Civilization, which I highly recommend. The 3rd book just came out. And he argues that we can't use capitalism as a frame because it's just a political economic system. And we can't simply refer to modernity, as academics do, because that's a sociocultural context. And capitalist modernity is both of them together. It's the totalizing force. It's the oxygen by which we live. The state of capitalist modernity we're in is called late-stage capitalism. And the reason people call it late-stage capitalism is that capitalism is a self-terminating logic. You cannot have perpetual growth on a finite planet, and so it requires perpetual growth, perpetual extraction. Money itself is based on debt and therefore requires growth. So capitalist modernity is the larger frame. Late-stage capitalism is the sort of era we're in, and the chapter of late-stage capitalism we're in is called neoliberalism. How many people are familiar with the term neoliberalism? Okay. So neoliberalism is not like a conspiracy theory, right? Like the theme of Davos last year was reforming neoliberalism. Every economics textbook in the world talks about neoliberalism. And it sounds like 2 not bad words, which, one percenters are very good at euphemisms. There's nothing new about neoliberalism, and there's nothing liberal about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism started in the late 70s. The architects were Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago and Friedrich Hayek, who was a European philosopher, and Robert Nozick at Harvard, who was a political philosopher. And Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were really taken by the idea of trickle-down economics and the invisible hand, the market like God, that if everyone just behaves really selfishly, somehow this perfect equilibrium will emerge. And they implemented and architected modern neoliberalism in the late 70s and early 80s when Thatcher was running the UK and Reagan was the president of the United States. And it's a sort of pro-corporate, highly extractive, growth-based, debt-based model for civilization. And it is the global civilizational operating system. There's nobody here that lives outside neoliberalism. Unless you are an uncontacted tribe in Papua New Guinea or remote Amazon and you're not dealing with currency, debt-based currency, fiat currency, you are enmeshed in neoliberalism. So I live in an alternative community a couple hours away from here. We bought the land, we put it into a trust, nobody owns it, we run it as a not-for-profit cooperative, and our clothes are still made in sweatshops, and our farm truck uses fossil fuels, and people fly around the world to come to our little center. And we are all complicit and enmeshed in neoliberalism. So what the top of the pyramid is showing is that this is the totalizing operating system. And every aspect of our lives is influenced by it. We were all born into neoliberalism. No one here was born and ratified that they want to work shitty jobs that they don't enjoy and pay mortgages on houses they don't own and have their entire childhood directed towards vocational education to be cogs in capitalist machinery. But that's what we were born into. And it's not just a political ideology. It's a theology. It's a religion. It has a point of view on every aspect of human nature. So just to give you a few examples, and I really wanted you to track your body. So do a little somatic tracking, and when I say the words, not just intellectually understand them, but be in this kind of embodied cognition state, and try to find the real estate where these ideas live. Are people familiar with the concept of memetics? So like a meme is the cultural equivalent of a gene. It's the base unit of an idea. And we use it colloquially as, you know, lolcats and internet memes and what have you. But it comes from Richard Dawkins' work in The Selfish Gene, and there's an entire branch of social science dedicated to it. And it's the biography of ideas, how memes are communicable diseases that can be caught, transferred from one person to another, and replicated throughout culture. And so we may think, well, we're anti-capitalists or post-capitalists, or we reject neoliberalism, and I promise you there is an invisible hand that lives inside everyone. It's the nature of socialization, entrainment, conditioning. And so I really want you to find that mimetic real estate in your body. And I'll just say a few premises that are at the top of this pyramid that affect every other aspect of the pyramid. So the first is, human beings are inherently selfish, that we are red in tooth and claw, that hierarchy and order is necessary, or we'll all end up killing each other and descend into mere anarchy. And even though we've had 30 years of social science to prove that this is not true, that we're highly cooperative, highly altruistic, you know, we're hardwired for empathy, we have these mirror neurons in our body, it's still the dominant ideology. Human beings are inherently selfish. Part of that is that state is required for control. If we did not have nation states or corporations or sun emperors or whatever the story was at the time, that there would be this chaotic disorder, that we cannot self-organize. And even though that has been proven wrong, that's still the dominant culture, and that lives within all of our bodies. The third is that wealth is the arbiter of success. So the more money you have, you are somehow more worthy, more intelligent, more industrious, as opposed to lucky, greedy, psychotic. And if you don't have money, you're somehow a moral failure. You're not pulling yourselves up by the bootstraps. So it's inherently ahistorical. There's no discussion about how wealth was created in the first place, that Western Europeans invented debt-based capital at the same time as they started their colonialist expansion and genocided huge parts of the world's population. The estimate is 50 to 100 million people just in Latin America, indigenous peoples, first peoples of the Latin American continent. Estimates are 20 to 30 million in Turtle Island in North America, and probably another 10 to 15 in Central America in this part of the world. And so what happened is we used to have many ways to acquire goods and services. Gifting, bartering, trading, hunting, fishing, etc. Now, if you're an indigenous person in, let's say, Alaska, you now cannot fish in your own ancestral rivers without paying US dollars for your permit. It has to be sanctioned by the state. And that imposition gave Western Europeans and their descendants a 500-year head start on capital. So there's a reason why there's a direct correlation between wealth concentration and whiteness. And I'm going to refer to whiteness a lot in this conversation and this talk. And it's important to name it, because whiteness is not just a racial construct. It's a mimetic construct. It's a cultural construct. Bless you. There's an indigenous medicine man from Brazil named Chief Ninawa, some of you may know, from the Huniquin ayahuasca tribe in Accra in Brazil. His definition of whiteness and coloniality is that colonialism is a neurological, cultural, evolutionary impairment. It's an impairment that makes you believe you are separate from the living world, from the tribe of the dead, our ancestors, and the tribe of the living, other human beings, the more than human realm. And so this cognitive impairment is communicable, like a disease. And we're enmeshed in a culture that reifies the small s self, right? Everyone we meet, what do you do for a living? What's your name? Passports, every border check. Toll booth capitalism is dependent on our small s identity. And so what happens is in this very strong individualistic culture is there's a taker culture. That's the dominant culture. And it can be characterized by whiteness because it was born in Western Europe, and then it was exported across the world, and now we call it development, financial inclusion, whatever, entrepreneurship, social innovation, whatever the euphemistic meme is for neocolonialism. And colonialism is not a thing that ended. We are in the midst of ongoing coloniality. Every time a McDonald's or a GM plant opens in the geopolitical south, every time a mine opens, every time wealth is transferred from the global north to the global south, that is part of the ongoing coloniality that we are enmeshed in. And now, there's also an esoteric layer to this, right? That I'm not saying all white people are bad or all white people are rich. That's obviously stupid, dualistic, binary thinking. There's, of course, poor white people. And often when we talk about race and whiteness, the white fragility comes out and people start saying, well, there's my grandfather grew up in a trailer park or whatever. And it's like, yeah, and they were not descendants of slaves that were shipped here to build the American dream on the bodies of indigenous peoples. And they don't have to deal with structural racism in the same way. And so black people have all of that stuff in addition to structural racism. So they're non-comparable. On an esoteric layer, we've chosen to incarnate in white bodies, in black bodies, in hetero bodies, in trans bodies, non-binary bodies, etc., male bodies, female bodies. Partly to do the redemption work of our ancestors. And so we don't want white-bodied people to be collapsing into victimhood and shame. That's not going to do anything. We have 10 or 20 years left of the Western way of living, and we need everybody online for what's coming. And we have no idea what's coming. Anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen is either bullshitting you or is consumed by delusion and self-confidence. That's not warranted. So if we just look at the IPCC reports, the International Panel on Climate Change, which is very conservative, the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, they're all breathing down the necks of these scientists, 10,000 of the top scientists in the world, Earth system scientists, climatologists, geologists. And the last report, the Code Red report, had 14 feedback loops in it. The report before that had 9. I'll give you a sense of one feedback loop. The Siberian ice sheet has 12 times more carbon in the form of methane than we've released since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There's a direct correlation between GDP per capita and carbon in the atmosphere, because we have a fossil fuel extractive economy. We have heated up the planet 1.2 degrees since 1850, since we started coal-based, fossil fuel-based industrialization and globalization. Now, just this one ice sheet has 12 times that, and it's in the form of methane, which is much faster acting. So what's happening is, as the temperature heats up, the ice sheet is melting faster. As the ice sheet melts faster, smaller pieces of ice break off and they melt faster. That's a feedback loop. It's a human-induced anthropocentric feedback loop. Now, Shell, Exxon, Total, Mobil, they're digging in these ice sheets because now they can access more fossil fuels. And so the ice melts faster. Just this one ice sheet, the potential is a 20 to 30 meter sea level rise in the next 20 years from one feedback loop. There's 14 of them. That means every major city we know will be underwater. LA, New York, Tokyo, London, Sydney, Vancouver, you name it, it'll be underwater. It took Amsterdam 150 years to build the infrastructure to be 1.5 meters below sea level. There's no way we are going to be able to mitigate what's coming. We are now aiming for a 3-degree rise in temperature by 2050. A 3-degree rise in temperature is correlated to 40% biodiversity loss. Wow. That's 40% of all living things. Now, it's not going to be dogs and zebras and things we can see. It's the phytoplankton in the ocean, it's lichen, it's coral reefs, it's all the essential ecosystem function beings, capstone species, and so we have no idea what's coming. That's just feedback loops. Then we've crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries already. Ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just about carbon in the atmosphere. 3-degree rise is also related to a 20-meter sea level rise outside of any other feedback loop by the end of the century. So the discontinuous change that's coming is on a magnitude that we can't even fathom. The human brain evolved on the savannah in small hunter-gatherer tribes for 99% of human history. We are not neurologically and cognitively, and in this culture spiritually, hardwired to understand discontinuous change on this level. And so that's the culture we're in. The top of this pyramid also has a very deep ontology baked in. And the most accurate way to describe that ontology is 3 words: separation, materialism, and rationalism. So what that means is we are separate to the living world. We are anthropocentrically hubristic in believing that we are on the top of the evolutionary food chain, that we are the peak and pinnacle of evolution, and that we are separate from the rest of the biosphere. And then you dig down and you get to materialism. And what materialism tells us is that the entire living world can be deconstructed into its constituent parts, right? The entire world can be reduced to the atom to the neutron, the proton, the electron, and now with quantum physics, photon, quasars, quanta, what have you. And the role of science is to create the grand unifying theory of everything. That's how arrogant and stupid we are. That we can reduce the entire world into its constituent parts without any holistic Gestalt understanding of the complexity of ecosystems and a world Gaian system that has its own entelechy, its own being, its own agency. And then the rationalism is that not only are we separate and we can materially reduce the world, we can understand this with human rationality. Not only can we understand it, we are entitled to understand and deconstruct the world for our own purposes. That is the holy trinity of death culture. So that's the top of the pyramid. It affects all of us. It lives in all of our bodies, whether we like it or not. We've all been trained to ontologically gaze at the world in that way. And then we dig one level below on this pyramid behind me, and we'll have the sectors. So people in various sectors get very excited about their entrepreneurial endeavors. They're like, well, I'm going to start a media company, or I'm going to start a foundation, or I'm going to start a tech company, or I'm going to do crypto, or science and technology, or get my PhD, or whatever. And all of these sectors are subsectors of neoliberalism. There's nothing that is outside of the neoliberal operating system. So scientists who think they're independent researchers, their research is determined by corporations' interests and government interest on what they should be researching. The type of people who get into the schools that get to do the PhDs at Stanford and Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge and the London School of Economics and all the elite farms, their entire research agenda is determined by one percenters' agenda. So David Graeber, was the most famous living anthropologist, died a couple of years ago, said, I thought at this time in history we were going to have flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters on Twitter. And the reason is the world reflects the values of power elites. The reason we have so few artists and dreamers and medicine people and so many lawyers and bankers and accountants is that they reflect back the values of the culture. So the top of the pyramid is amplifying itself all the way down. And then we go one level below, and then we have institutions. And then there's this delusion that at an institutional level, we're going to have more agency and more freedom. Lynn and I, when we were doing our interviews for the book, interviewed 150 people, cosmologists, indigenous elders, wisdom keepers, activists, funders. And we met this young billionaire who was one of the early Facebook founders. And he was so excited about starting his new foundation. He was like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to give $4 billion away. Here's all my leverage points and my acupuncture points for the neoliberal system. Quite radical politics. And we saw him 18 months later, and he was completely deflated. He was like, all my hedge fund managers, accountants, lawyers have kept my money in this endowment. I can only give 5% of my money so I could keep on growing my pie, or they'll say I'll lose power and influence. He's trapped by 501c3, IRS, US tax law around foundations and not-for-profits, who he can give to, very narrow mandates or they get audited. Like the whole structure is just replicating neoliberal logic at an institutional level, at a sectoral level, at operating system level, right? Even if you're running a socialist country like Evo Morales in Bolivia or Lula in Brazil, you are in the job creation business, you are in the GDP creation business. Your job as a political leader is to grow your country's GDP at minimum 3%, and the role of the Davos global elite is to grow the global economy at 3%. The reason 3%, we won't get into a lot of detail about this now, but essentially, through the Federal Reserve System, through the fiat currency system, banks own the Federal Reserves. They print that money at debt at 1%. That money gets lent out to us at 2% prime. And so in order for money to be valuable within this paradigm, your growth has to exceed your interest rate in order for money to be valuable. That's the economics 101 of it. And now 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's an exponential function. So it requires the doubling of the global economy every 24 years. So think about that. Double the amount of Big Macs, double the amount of Apples, Toyotas, single-use plastics, short-haul flights, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the first time economists and ecologists agree there will not be another doubling of the global economy in our lifetime. So the Ponzi scheme of neoliberalism is going to collapse on its own weight within our lifetime at the same time as ecological collapse, species extinction, et cetera, et cetera. It's all going to happen within our lifetime. So we have a very different generational task than our parents, a very different cultural task than our parents. And so then we come down to the individual level, and as individuals we think we have all this agency and freedom, but where you grew up, who your neighbors are, what you do for a living, how much free time you have, etc., is all determined by the money, debt, growth-based system. And so our freedom is an illusion because it's based within the psychosis of the death culture. So that's the pyramid slide. We could go to the next slide. We can skip this slide and skip this slide. This is a piece of artwork that's in the book from Federico Cruz, who's a Zapatista artist and organizer from Mexico. And it says, "You can't solve money problems with money," which is a very famous Zapatista's line. And he's really speaking here to ontology. right? You can't solve problems at the same level of ontology or consciousness as in which they were created. So more solutionism and more crypto and more social entrepreneurship and more innovation are just going to create more geoengineering or whatever. They're just going to create more of the same because we're operating within that same structure. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is where we start talking about ontological shifts. And the question is, okay, so what do we do? And the Western mind wants to go to problem solving, because that's what we're trained in. And English is a very binary language. It's a very binary, dualistic language. It's based on a lot of nouns, a lot of othering, this, that, where let's take another example like Lakota. Old Lakota is a verb language. They don't say a storm is coming, they say storming. Everything is animate and alive. The ontology is buried within the grammar and context of the language itself. And so part of the ontological shifts are not just language. Like the mind wants to go to, well, we just have to crack language, or we just have to crack culture, or we just have to crack structure, or we just have to crack the money system. But the very gaze by which we look at the world is colonized. And our very somatic experience in these bodies is colonized because we are born in the Anthropocene, in the Kali Yuga, in the Dark Ages. How many people are familiar with this idea of the Kali Yuga? Okay. So in the Vedic tradition, time is cyclical. And there's a yuga, a grand yuga, which is in some counts 26,000 years. And we start with the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age, which lasts 12,000 years. It's the longest period. And then as we become arrogant and hubristic and separate ourselves from the living world and start to think it's our creation rather than co-creation with the living cosmos, we degrade into the Silver Age, and then the Bronze Age, and then the Kali Yuga, which is the Dark Ages. And all Vedic astrologers point to that we are in the Kali Yuga right now. And many other mystical traditions and indigenous traditions have their own version of it. So for Buddhists, this is the age of degeneration. For the Hopi, this is the time of the sixth sun. For the Iroquois, this is the time of the seventh fire, where we have to choose between annihilation and something else. And what that is going to require is a shift in our gaze from a somatic level, an ancestral level, and a relational level. And that's what we refer to when we say ontological shifts. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk about all of these, but these are just some of the ontological shifts we've been tracking. And I'll just maybe focus on one or two of these, and then we can open discussion after that. So we talked a bit about separation, materialism, rationalism, the holy trinity of the death culture. So what's an alternative to that? So I'll just give you an example. This wood table that this flower and microphone and phone are on, with my colonized gaze, I would see this as dead inert matter that I'm entitled to do with what I want. Now, a mystical indigenous worldview would be something like, and I'm not saying they're all universal, but something like, this being is my kin that I'm in relationality to and with and through, and it is chosen to be here. It has its own agency and its own will, and I'm not entitled to do with it what I want without consent and dialogue, which requires me to be able to dialogue with something that is outside of me, that is not separate, that is not materially reducible, and that is not rationally understood by the mind. Now, I'm not saying there's no use for rationality, but what I'm calling for is a trans-rationality, where science is just the floor of understanding rather than the ceiling of understanding. 150 years ago, we thought the Earth was 1 billion years old. Creationists still think it's 6,000 years old. 250 years ago, we didn't even know about the single sperm theory of creation. We thought that multiple sperms were creating a baby. And so science is always evolving. It's like the younger brother of common sense and intuition. And so instead of pedestalizing science, it's putting science in its place as one way to rationally deduce a shared worldview. And that there's other ways of knowing, being, sensing, and relating to and through and with the world. And so our intuition, whispers of ancestors, knowledge from plants that are millions of years older than us, putting our head to the soil, these are all as valid as scientific materialism. And so that's the move from, let's say, rationalism to relationalism. And what we're calling for is a more, let's say, quantum, queer, relational, animistic worldview, where the cosmos is alive, that the universe is alive, that we are constituent parts within this unfolding consciousness and this unfolding awareness. How many people are familiar with the philosophy of idealism? Sometimes in the West it's called Neoplatonism, because the West needs to be self-referential with all of its knowledge, even though Plato stole most of his ideas from the ancient Egyptians. So in the scientific reductionist materialist worldview, there's something called the hard problem of consciousness, right? Most people have heard of the hard problem of consciousness. It's the main aim of neuroscience. And the reason they have made up this hard problem is that they say the brain is just neural correlates firing. So how could the mind, how could consciousness emerge from this machine just shooting neurons? And they call this the hard problem of consciousness, how consciousness comes from machine brain. Now, Sufism, for example, the mystical branch of Islam, which is my lineage, and Neoplatonic philosophy, Gnostic philosophy for Christians, Hermetic philosophy, ancient Egyptian philosophy, Taoism, many indigenous cultures, esoteric Buddhism, they have a more idealistic approach. And what idealism says is that we are within the mind of God, or cosmic mind, or consciousness itself unfolding upon itself. And that we are fractal reflections of this cosmic mind. And that we are more like disassociated alters. So think of like disidentification disorder, right? Where you have multiple personalities and you don't know when one host is taking over and another host is taking over. Our lives are kind of like that. We have this deep amnesia where we're disassociated from cosmic mind. And we occasionally get glimpses of it. This is why mystical traditions gear their entire spiritual practice to the transcension of subject-object. The idea that I'm the subject and this is the object. And they do that through whirling dervish dances, sweat lodge, initiation rituals, rites of passage, psychedelics, tantra, mantra, yantra, whatever it happens to be. And the aim of transcending subject-object is to be of deeper service to community and in service to life. And so you have these experiences to come back to the tribe of the living and help them reorient from the intensity of socialization. Clifford Geertz, one of the great anthropologists, one of the founders of anthropology, said, culture is just a collectively agreed upon set of delusions. That's all culture is. And at the same time, it's totalizing. We're social beings, we're cultural beings, and so when we enter cultural milieu, we often try to emulate that culture. And if what we want is a Wikipedia page when we die and a nice job title at Google and comfort and to be able to buy whatever the fuck we want on Amazon.com or whatever the culture is selling on tap, then we are already seduced, hijacked. We're already good agents of neoliberalism. And so part of the work is to become conscientious objectors of our times. And it was very easy to do that, let's say in the 1940s, when we had a mustachioed fascist. And you could say, well, the Nazis are the enemy, and I'm going to be a conscientious objector. Or, in the Korean or Vietnam War in the US, when Americans would say, I'm not going to fight the old man's war. Now, it's much more complex when we're in the midst of late-stage capitalism. Because what capitalism is, think about it this way. Think of it as a complex, adaptive, evolutionary system. It's alive. Not in the way an ecosystem is alive, but in the way a Frankenstein or artificial intelligence is alive. There's a set of generative rules that are just made up, right? We made up compound interest. So if you have capital, you get exponential capital. If you have debt, you get exponential debt. We made up the fiat-based currency system. We made up tax laws. So if you're speculating on land or hedge funds or whatever, you only pay 15% tax. But if you have a single job and you're a hardworking person, you pay 40% tax. There's just made up rules, right? That's all neoliberalism is. And so what neoliberalism does and what late-stage capitalism does and what capitalist modernity does is that it finds the people that best serve its logic and it pulls them to the top. So we think that there's a merit system. Right? You go to the right school, you get the right job, you're going to do well, and everyone's just competing to have, the first-class cabin on the Titanic. But actually, what the system is doing is it finds the people that best serve its logic. So what's the logic? We just have to look around us, right? Extractive, short-termist, greedy, life-destroying, acquisitive, right? Acquisition determines who we are, how much we have. And then the best servants of that logic become presidents and prime ministers and CEOs. And so when you have a complex adaptive lens on this, instead of looking at the cover of Fortune magazine or New York Times or what have you as somehow these people are intelligent and worthy, we can just see them for what they are, which is psychotic, greedy, lucky, and the best servants of life-destroying culture. So we go to the next slide. Yeah, this slide. This will be the last slide. So I'm just going to leave you with a different type of ontology. And at the center of the spiral logic, which is in opposition to pyramid logic, and I say opposition very explicitly, there's this belief in the New Age world that, well, I'm not political. I don't believe in judgment. It creates more dualism. Well, Howard Zinn, the famous American historian, said, you cannot be neutral on a moving train. If you believe you're not political or not ideological, you are serving the political ideology of the dominant culture. So spiral logic is in direct opposition to pyramid logic, explicitly. There's a line that was given to me by a plant much smarter than I am. And it said, if you do not have a critique of capitalist modernity, you are contextually irrelevant. If all you have is a critique, you are socially, politically, culturally, spiritually impoverished. So the first part of that is, if you do not have a critique of capitalist modernity, if you are not a good student of the culture you live in, of the times you live in, you are contextually irrelevant. But so that's to the left, basically, to the activists. And if all you have is a critique, you are creatively and spiritually impoverished, because we have to build embodied cultures of post-capitalism. And you don't need a PhD in political philosophy or economics to build those cultures. You can find two other people and build a triad and be in discourse and dialogue about what's happening in your body, the jobs you have to do in order to sustain yourself, how you create culture amongst each other starts to build culture, right? Just the very act of a gift is one of the most radical acts, because it breaks the culture of commodification, of attribution. So I see someone on the street and they like my shirt, and I take my shirt off and I give it to that person, and then they try to take my phone number. And I'm like, I don't need your phone number. Like, it's just a gift. And that shifts something in them, because people don't give things in this culture without getting something back, including a phone number. And as soon as you do that, you've chipped away at the commodification culture. You've chipped away at the transactional culture. You've chipped away at attribution culture. This person doesn't even know my name. And so you don't need to be an activist. You don't need to be a musician, a famous person, a rich person before you start creating embodied cultures, because that's an old trap, right? I'm going to become a billionaire and then I'm going to start my philanthropy and this is the only way I'm going to do good in the world. That's part of the neoliberal paradigm. They want inclusion by any means necessary. And so at the core of the spiral is the idea of cosmology. That you yourself have to decide why we're here, where you think we're going, what is beauty, why are we doing what we're doing, what's the role of the human enterprise in the broader congress of life. Now, we've abdicated that responsibility to priests and mullahs and Qurans and Bibles and CEOs and political leaders and what have you. And even in Western culture, there was a time where, in Greek and Roman culture, for example, everybody was responsible for being in philosophical inquiry about first principles. And now that's still true in intact cultures like Taoism and Sufism and other indigenous cultures. But that's not true in the West. If we spent a third of the time in contemplation about our culture that we do doing self-help and self-development, we would already have a revolution on our hands. But, you know, the cult of I and the Me Too brigade are more about self-development than they are about tending the communal field and village-mindedness. And so cosmology is not just for yourself. It is for the village. It is for the tribe. It is for the broader ecosystem of life. And it's discursive. It's not like, go contemplate in a 10-day vipassana and you'll be done. Right? It's discursive, it's self-reflexive, it's interconnected, it's constantly evolving. And then as we spiral out of cosmology, there's a recasting of the individual from this idea of the atomized self, you know, the locus, the unit of being as you, to human being as a web of relational entanglements. Like, there is no me on one very important existential level. Right? I only have a name so other people can call me that name. My gut biome is made of 90% bacteria. We are symbionts. We are cyborgs. We're holobionts. We are a congress of life that is beyond the idea of the individual. We're messy and entangled and complex. And biology is catching up with this, evolutionary biology, Earth system science, etc. But we're starting to understand, you know, this old Ubuntu line of we are who we are through others, including bacteria, including lichen, including photosynthesis. There is no us outside of a relational web of entanglements. And then that shift in ontology around the relational web of entanglements then feeds into the idea of social ecologies. So instead of thinking of institutions and movements and communities and being so identified with structures that we've built, it's like, how are these social ecologies useful in deepening webs of relational entanglement with human and more than human realms? And then these social ecologies then feed into biomes. And so the old model is to see biomes as like sectors. This is media, and this is technology, and this is government, and this is science, and this is academia. And the only use of a biome is to be in service to the broader superstructure. That's the role of a biome. So a desert may look like a desert, and a rainforest may look like a rainforest, but the aim of a rainforest and the aim of a desert is not to exist on its own. It's holding the desert frequency, it's holding the rainforest frequency, only because there's an entire ecology of other biomes that allow it to be what it is. There's sand that flows from the Sahara to the Amazon every year in a massive migration that provides the minerals the Amazon needs from the Sahara. Right? The entire Earth itself is an ecosystem. It is a holobiont. And then the role of the superstructure, which right now is neoliberalism, can then be in service to the Gaian entelechy. This word entelechy is a Greek word. That means within it, it has its own purpose. So Gaia is not just some cool New Age hippie concept that we talk about when we're high on LSD. Gaia is a living being that we are constituent parts of, and she herself is embedded in the solar system, held in place by moon and sun and wind and stars. And that solar system is embedded within the Milky Way, which is embedded within an expanding emergent universe. And so none of these things are separate from each other. And so when we shift our gaze from, I'm going to just make fun of nonviolent communication and authentic relating and all these white modalities, from the idea of like my needs, my interests, my experience, to putting our head on the soil and being like, Pachamama, what do you want and what do you need, and how can I be in service to your unfolding and your consciousness, and do that as spiritual political praxis, like build altars to the Divine Mother and spend a year tending that altar before we start making decisions about our careers and how we want to spend our life force. Like, that is a more interesting strategy than what are the choices we're given, right? We're 17 and we go to college and we have to decide if we're going to be a lawyer or an accountant or a banker or an architect or whatever the 7 banal choices we're given are. Like, that's how we decide how we're going to spend our adult life and our educational entrainment. And there's other ways to do this. Cultures worthy of the word culture were based on initiation. So you would be taken at 14, let's say in a place like Gabon in West Africa, and you'd be buried in the soil for 3 days. You'd be taken in the middle of the night against your will and buried for 3 days with no food and no water, with your head above soil, in order for you to die the deathless death, to be reborn in service to your community because you now understand the value of life. But we have no relationship with death, right? We have a death-phobic culture. We have a culture that's doing life extension and trying to upload our consciousness to the AI and go to Mars and colonize the moon. And our fear of death is based on the spiritual orphanhood of Western culture, where pagans and indigenous people who understood reincarnation and understood the eternal nature of the soul through cross and sword were converted to Christianity, and through that trauma then imposed that trauma on the rest of the world through globalization and colonialism and imperialism and genocide, and then don't want to talk about the fact that they're on stolen land based on the blood of indigenous people and the enslavement of 100 million Africans. And so that denial ends up creating this fear of death and this denial of death, and so there's no relationship to the continuum of life. And so the part of the ontological shift is to reorient ourselves from selfish, atomized individuals who live this finite life, and we have to acquire the most crap we can get in order to have our eternal validation in the material realm, to recasting our gaze to something bigger than us, because that's where purpose comes from. Even the idea of purpose is such a Western concept, right? It's such a selfish, petty, meaningless notion. My uncle, who's a Sufi scholar and the lineage holder of our tribe, when I was 17 and applying to universities and doing all the bullshit you have to do, was visiting us in Vancouver, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm putting in my applications for university, and I have to figure out my purpose. That's what they're telling me at school." And he just sort of laughed in my face. And he said, "There is no such thing as purpose. Your life is a consequence of your prayer. You refine your prayer, and your purpose just evolves. So tend your altar, deepen your practice, and then whatever you need to do will just emerge as service work, not some selfish inquiry into how I make the most money and be successful in a dying culture." So I'm going to end there and say, part of the practice for this inquiry is how do we become more contextually sensitive so we can become more contextually relevant? Because if we're not sensitive to the context, if our white fragility is stopping us from really being in deep inquiry about colonialism, about imperialism, about capitalism, then we are not going to be relevant to the context. We're going to come up with more bad ideas like social entrepreneurship and conscious capitalism and cryptocurrency and geoengineering. We're just going to replicate the harm and the trauma. And trauma culture and initiation culture have very similar gates, let's say. There's the severance, there's the integration of that severance from being pulled away from what you know and love and understand, and then there's this reintegration as, in our culture, a traumatized person imposing their trauma on other people, and trauma has now become the new monotheism. It's our excuse for everything. Well, I was traumatized. And an initiation culture has those three gates as well. But the point of the trauma is not just the moment of the meteorite's impact. It's also the restructuring and reformulating of the body. Right? I'm very grateful to my trauma. I'm very, very grateful to the trauma my ancestors endured to be here, because it gives us a resilience and an evolutionary cultural advantage, because I'm less susceptible to the bullshit of acquisition and power and desire to be on some kind of hierarchy over other beings. And so trauma is humbling in that way. And humility is the midwife of new, ancient, emerging ontologies. And there was a line that came to me also from a plant much smarter than me, where she said, "The seed of all ontology is ignorance. The seed of all ontology is ignorance." If you could just start to fathom the ignorance by which you live, if you could just start to contemplate the consequences of all the little actions you don't even know how they ripple out karmically into the universe. And she would show me, a piece of plastic I dropped when I was 17 years old and where it ended up, or a line I said to some undergrad student when I was teaching class. She's not saying right or wrong. She just said, contemplate your ignorance. And through that understanding of ignorance and consequence, which is what an adult does, they understand the consequence. They know when they're wrong. There's none of this new age, there is no wrong, there is no right, I have my perspective, you have... No, you can be wrong. There's a wrong way to live. We're doing it. And that redemption work can then open up. And the midwife of that redemption work, the redemption work of our ancestors, who we are the living prayers of, the midwife of that is humility. Yeah, shukran. So I'm going to stop there and we'll just open up for questions. I don't know if we're passing this mic around. Or...
Hi. It's nice meeting you. And my question will be, if within this apologetic that you've done of, within this apologetic that you've done of this, like, this, it's called, this speech, would you say, is there any advice that if you could condensate for entrepreneurs that are trying to redefine society, what would it be?
Thank you for the question. So I'll start by saying, I come from a Sufi mystical tradition, and I come from an anarchist political philosophy. So as a mystic and an anarchist, I'm not really in the business of giving people advice. I say, listen to your ancestors, put your forehead to the soil, ask the more than human realm what to do. And I'm an opinionated motherfucker, so I'm going to say something about entrepreneurship. And nothing I'm saying is true with a capital T. I don't believe in truth. I believe in multiple simultaneous subjective ontologies. So I'm just going to wonder out loud for a second. Entrepreneurship is a bridgehead for capitalism. And what the lure of entrepreneurship is baked in and has sort of formulated is the idea of the individualistic hero, the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, the whatever, and that somehow these entrepreneurs are going to reshape culture. But if you look at the data on entrepreneurship, the Baffler, maybe 10 years ago, the magazine, countercultural magazine, wrote this great essay where they said, where they sort of dissected the research on entrepreneurship. And it's like, entrepreneurs work way more hours, get paid way less than wage slaves, and are way less successful in the world, much higher levels of depression. So it's basically a scam to make us believe that we can change the world. Now, 93 cents of every dollar ends up in the hands of the top 1% after the multiplier. So it doesn't matter how you're making your money. Corporate social responsibility, doing kambo ceremonies on weekends, whatever. At the end of the day, 93 cents of that dollar is going to end up in the hands of the top 1%, who use that money to lobby for lower taxes for 1%ers, fund wars, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no winning within a debt-based, growth-based system. It is a self-terminating logic. And so a more interesting lens is, how do we hospice modernity? And there's a beautiful book by Vanessa Andreotti I highly recommend. She's a Brazilian educator, and she wrote this book called Hospicing Modernity. That's maybe one of the best political books of the last 10 years. And I think we need less entrepreneurs, less bankers, less accountants, less lawyers, and more death doulas.
What gives you hope?
Very tricky, seductive question. You know, the Western. No.
From a spiritual perspective, what fuels you? Because when you were saying you're giving like kind of an entry point, and then segueing into the intersection where we are.
Yeah.
I grew up in an activist family, pretty much like we're sitting here. So I would say I resonate with everything. It's not that I have not heard like any new word, and it's very beautiful and eloquent, and I agree. And the question is then,
No, I understand.
what wakes you up in the morning? Is there hope? And so on.
So I study death and dying, and I have a teacher named Stephen Jenkinson, who some of you may know, who wrote Die Wise. And he's one of the most articulate people in the English language. He's an animist philosopher. And he says, hope is inherently hostile to the present moment. Hope is inherently hostile to the present moment. And partly what he's saying is that hope is some projection into some future state that makes us present phobic. And we have a culture that's present phobic. We have a culture that desires certainty, inspiration. Often when I, very rarely, but occasionally have to give talks to New Age groups, they're often like, feed me inspiration, feed me hope. And I'm like, why do you feel entitled to hope? Why do you feel entitled to inspiration? 5,000 years of separation from the living world, hierarchy, patriarchy, white supremacy, genocide, imperialism, and colonialism. We are now living in the age of consequence. All of that is going to come to roost in our lifetimes. Collapse upon collapse upon collapse, cascading collapses. Now, what's more interesting is, how do we die well? Now, 99.9% of every species that's ever existed on this planet is no longer with us. So the 60 million species that are alive in the world today are only 0.01% of all the life Gaia has ever birthed. And so maybe the point isn't to live forever and upload our consciousness to the cloud. Maybe the point is to learn to die well, right? Because the moment we die is the culmination of all of our life's lessons in that single moment. How you die is more important than how you live. To be Buddha in the midst of 20-meter sea level rise and hurricanes and forest fires, and that is a good death. And so we're practicing resilience. And what gives me hope is not the anthropocentric lens. I don't have hope in human beings. I dislike most people. But I have hope in Gaia. I have hope in her enteleki, in her will. Again, I don't believe consciousness is just in the human brain. Consciousness is throughout my body. My stomach has as all of our stomachs do, a vagus nerve that is sending most of the signals to my brain to tell me the quality of my thoughts and how I feel right now. We are ecosystems embedded within ecosystems, embedded within ecosystems. There's a famous Sufi line, often attributed to Rabia of Basra, the 8th century Sufi mystic, who some people say was the reincarnation of Muhammad. And she was a heretic, like me. And she said this line that is, the body is the prophet, the desert is the prophet. The body is the prophet, the desert is the prophet. Now, the reason that's a heretical line is in institutionalized Islam, there's one final prophet, which is Muhammad. And technically, I would have to say, may peace be upon him. And I always tell Muslims, when I talk about the 200 species that are going extinct every day because of our way of living and our addiction to Amazon.com and consumption, then I save may peace be upon them. And so she was a heretic. And it's a heretical line because she's saying the body is the prophet, so you are a fractal reflection of cosmic mind, even though you may be a disassociated alter. And the desert is the prophet, the landscape, the ecology is the prophet, because consciousness is not just in here, or here, or here, it's throughout. So consciousness is going to continue whether we upload it or not, right? So, neuroscience doesn't even know what the fuck consciousness is. After 30 years of neuroscience and hundreds of billions of dollars being poured into neuroscience, their solution to the mind-brain problem, the hard problem of consciousness, is it's an epiphenomena of brain, which means they don't have a fucking clue. Epiphenomena means circling around phenomena. It is an emergent phenomena, which means 1 + 1 = 3, and we have no idea how. And so my hope is not in human consciousness in perpetuation, but it's in Gaian consciousness and cosmic consciousness. And so my loyalty is not to any institution or any idea or any person. It is to the living cosmos unfolding and becoming self-aware by any means necessary. And if that's through us, shukran. And if it's not through us, shukran. And if you don't know, shukran is an Arabic mantra that comes from shukran lillah wal alhamdulillah. All praise due to Allah the Most High. And in Sufi tradition, we are Allah becoming self-aware. So when you say shukran, instead of like thank you, where there's a you and a me and agency and linearity, and it's more like a nod to cosmic entanglement, to the ancestors, the wind, the elements, the conspiracy of forces that led to this moment.
Hi. Brilliant talk. You are, in many ways, quite prophetic, and I really appreciate your elucidation on these deep ontologies and philosophies. One, are you okay with me digging like a little bit and maybe getting into it? This talk is about in the embodiment of post-capitalism. Do you have a bank account?
So there's a famous line by Jeremy Bentham, who's no friend of mine, but occasionally had a couple of great one-liners. He's the father of utilitarianism, for those of you who don't know. And he said, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. We are all enmeshed within the capitalist system. We are all living in contradiction. You cannot operate in late-stage capitalism without a bank account. Now, I have no income and I have no savings on purpose. I'm sure I could find lots of ways to make money if I wanted to make money. It's just not what motivates me. And I love living in the gift. And it's part of my spiritual political praxis to be with money in a way that if I'm aligned with cosmic mind and the Gaian entelechy, I'm given whatever I need. And when I'm not, I have to refine my prayer, because I'm not trying to live some ascetic Buddhist lifestyle. I don't believe in that. Even though I think Osho was a psychopath, I think that his notion of Zorba the Buddha is an interesting notion, right? Zorba, the hedonistic, indulgent king, and Buddha, the selfless one. And so I like to live a good life, and I'm not a hoarder. Like, archetypally, to be a hoarder at the end of time is a pretty dismal fucking archetype. Like, who wants to be that? And what happens is I just do what I do in the world, and then, like, we end up getting a piece of land with 20 of our friends, and this magical thing happens. Money appears in bank accounts, and we're all artists and healers and activists at Tierra Valiente. We had a friend who never sold a piece of art for more than $2,000, and she got a 50,000 euro commission paid up front before she even painted this piece of art. And then 2 years later, I saw her piece of art, and it was a white Arabic stallion. She's an abstract expressionist. And she painted a white Arabic stallion, which is my totem. And so I was like, one of our other partners lived in like the ghetto of Budapest, and they're a Hungarian couple, and they got offered 50,000 euro more than the asking price of their house. And all of this magic just conspired for us to get this piece of property. And it's not because we're trying to acquire it. Like, I didn't even want to live in Costa Rica. I was saying to you that I used to joke that the last two places I ever want to end up are Bali or Costa Rica. And I don't even know why I said that. I'd been to Costa Rica once and Bali once, and I was just like, too many New Age people, too many ayahuasca centers, too many gringos, like too much New Age blah blah and regenerative community talk while they're selling subdivisions for 60% profit. Like, I don't want to be hanging out with these people. And then the universe is like, you have a point of view. Enjoy paradise, motherfucker. And like, part of the practice is like, I call it chaos yoga. Like, how do you live between creation and surrender? There's these moments where you have to take your seat as co-God and co-creator. And then there's these moments where you just have to be in the humility of being a human being at the end of time. And the dance between knowing when to be in creator mode and be in surrender mode, like, that's the art of living. And so, yeah, I have a bank account. Our lawyer, for whatever reason, gifted me a truck. I was like, I don't think I can drive a 4x4 gas guzzler, so I converted it to natural gas and made it a hybrid with the little money I had. So every time I need something, it just appears. And, I'm not making this shit up. My partner's right here. She's often very stressed out about my nature and approach to chaos yoga. And it takes a toll on people around me occasionally. And my mom and people who care about me are like, don't you want like savings, and don't you want an RRSP, and you need to save up for a rainy day? I'm like, I live in the rainforest. It rains every fucking day. I promise you I will be fine. There is going to be no debt-based currency in 10 years, right? Like 40% of all US dollars in the world have been printed in the last 18 months. Yeah. It's the first time the global currency reserve is at risk of hyperinflation. This house of cards is not going to sustain itself, right? 1%ers are record submarine sales, record private island sales, record luxury bunker sales. They know what's coming. And, I work with social justice funders, and I often say to them, who are you going to be the day the dollar dies? Who are you going to be when there's no guns and there's no money? And by guns, I mean all technology. All dominator technology. No one's gonna drive your private plane, fly your private plane. No one's gonna drive your limousine. No one's gonna guard your gilded gates. The people who are gonna survive are people who live in community, people who grow their own food, or indigenous peoples that have unbroken symbiotic lines to plant in place. That's who will survive.
We live similar lifestyles. I'm sure that many people do, and that's how we kind of all came into coincidental being here. But in that, I consider myself to be a pantheist, and in that all spiritualities have paths to truth, that we can understand reality maybe at a deeper context. And you hit on some things of colonialism and Christianity, and I come from a Christian lineage, but my grandfather's a minister, and the reason I bring that up is that I think many spiritual teachers throughout time, female and male both, hit on many of the things that you're speaking about, and why I bring that up is Christ, the lineage that I studied under, speaks about mammon, and mammon is basically a demonic force of wealth, which is a belief that things can be owned. And out of that, he actually said you could either serve God or mammon, and God is maybe a life force, and mammon is basically this death force that you're talking about. The reason I bring that up is that I believe what you are in some ways discussing, I'd like to hear your opinions on, that in a way we're, and similar to some of this is taken from Daniel Pinchback. I just want to give credit, who's a friend of mine, and you might be familiar with his readings. But that with all of this culmination from ecocide to the house of cards and the political militarization and empiricism that just can't continue in GDP, that as well we seem to be maybe potentially on the hopeful potential side in this like initiatic collective birth canal that we have to go through in order to emerge into something that we may not even know what it is, but we're going through it. And in that, I say that, to me, in some ways, I think we are potentially experiencing an exorcism. And why I say that is that I believe that what money is actually a psychological force. And that psychological force actually creates within our consciousness the ability of the illusion of owning something, which on almost every other life form on this planet can recognize that is almost clearly impossible. And the reason I say that is if we are to see the dollar die, then what we're actually watching die is our possessions, right? Our belief in that attachment. And that's what Buddha also discusses, is that attachment, right? That attachment. And then if we look at that word from an English context, that we see possession, right? And so we say, like, this is my possession because I bought it, but that means that I am possessed, right? And so to remove that possession is an exorcism in a way. And so I guess why I'm bringing that all into clarity is that I think that you're another mind that really dives so deep into these contexts. And I guess what I'm curious on is, do you think that some of this death culture, not that it necessarily has to be demonic, but do you believe that we have the potential as a species to live beyond the monetary system and thrive, or do you think that it's going to be more of an entropic breakdown as the future continues?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Okay, so maybe we start with Christianity and deconstruct that a little bit and say, okay, Christ was not a Christian. He was a Jew that looked more like me than you. And the reason I go hard after Christianity, because it also often makes white people very sensitive, and even Gnostics get a little bit defensive, is that it is the global religion of empire. And when the Roman Empire strategically decided to merge with Christianity and move it throughout the world and created dualism, and then Enlightenment reinforced and codified dualism, the idea of human being separate to other, and then scientific revolution calcified that even more, is that what this dualism did was humans were separate to the living world, and then white people were separate to all the others, and then white Christian males were on top of that hierarchy. And so one of the major justifications for colonialism was that the savages were other. And there's these very famous debates that happened in Spain in the 1500s in the court of Ferdinand and Isabel, called the Valavoy debates, where there was only one defender of indigenous peoples, and that is Bartolomé de las Casas, the Good Friar. And he's against this entire Spanish court, and they're basically like, indigenous people are not human. And so of course we're justified in bringing Christianity to them. And de las Casas lost the debate and was exiled to be the prefect of Guatemala, Chiapas. And so Christianity is the global dominator culture. Now, if Islam did what Christianity did, instead of cross and sword, moon and star, and went around the world genociding people and then mutating into Christian capitalism, I'd be going hard after Islam. Like, my loyalty is not to institutions, religions, et cetera, et cetera. And so related to that is, I think this idea, and I know Daniel very well, and we're close friends, and I think this idea of initiatic collective moment is part of the Abrahamic, messianic, hopeful answer culture. Oh, we're going to get through this. It's just like the birth canal. Now, that may or may not be true. I don't know. What I'd say is more likely, given the trajectory of where we're going, is deep entropy and serious collapse. And I'm more in the culture of how do we learn to die well? How do we become death doulas? How do we train ourselves to be in non-dualistic, cognitive embodiment of what's coming? And how do we parent ourselves and adult ourselves to take responsibility for 5,000 years of destruction of the living world? And I don't know what will happen. What quantum physicists say, like Karen Barad, for example, says, we meet the universe halfway. That there is no such thing as predestiny on the one side, and there's no such thing as pure agency on the other side. That's a Western delusion. That through our intention and consciousness, we lock wave functions into superpositions of possibility. And so my sense is that we shift our gaze and our ontology from this childish, selfish, atomized consumption culture as spiritual political praxis, as life's work, into animistic, relational, quantum queer worldviews. And whatever world emerges is going to be a reflection of our ability to make those shifts in the deepest, most selfless ways. And the universe we are at every moment declaring who we are to the living cosmos. And she can hear us. And that's what matters. So I'm more involved and interested in the process of now than some messianic fantasy that has Christian milieu embedded in it and smuggled in.
I'm going to do my best to transition us. We're at the top of the hour now, 4 o'clock. Thank you so much for putting these thoughts in new perspectives. We started from the ground up. Now we're coming from a cosmological think down. So as we shift into this panel, we'll take a few minute break. What I would like us to think about or step into is that present moment, as you put it, the tribe of the living now. I would love to, as we go into that, many of the people who are here in this room are actively collaborating on creating community settlements of some sort. The perspective that you're coming from, the work that you've done, I'm very interested in knowing how that has informed the invisible structures that you're using at Tierra Valiente, for example. And in that now, and in that state of co-creation that these folks are in, what are some of the things that we, after hearing this, can be present with in the work that we're doing to co-create right now? So let's take a 5-minute break. We'll reposition the furniture a little bit and come back to take that on. I also want to touch into, I think what I wrote down was, tend your altar and refine your prayer. Out of all the other things that felt most significant, there is an altar that we have created behind this curtain on that table. You are invited to tend that altar collectively here with us. Please place those things there and allow that to refine our prayer. Anything else you'd like to share? Great, thank you.